And the teaching I did Sunday morning was a different one because it was on my heart, so important. I went through and traced the progression of Matthew, which we had gone through, up to the parables and the first four and how they fit together, the Shamash, how that fit with Revelation, end of chapter 2, Thyatira, and how the Shamash, the fourth of seven, is always important. Mm-hmm. The fourth parable is the leaven, and there's a woman putting leaven. And I love saying this. I said, I'm going to tell you exactly who that woman is. And you read it in context all you want. There's no name giving, but there is a name given. And then you go to the fourth church, which has a woman. Then you go to Revelation 17, and you have a woman. And it says in the fourth church, Thyatira, that God was going to cast a certain woman in that church into great tribulation. The same phrase that Jesus used in Matthew 24. So it's a whole study in itself. And then I got into, which actually all of us should know this, Ephesians 2:2. We used to walk according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, according to the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. And unless you find out what that spirit is, I spend a lot of time praying. It's when I started tracing all this. Bingo. The spirit in the end days. And I'll tell you what it is. It is the spirit of Jezebel. Yeah. And it's a spirit of rebellion. It's a spirit of coming against authority. It is a spirit of just, you have to have, it's about control. There's three things that are not allowed when you talk with them. Someone has the spirit of Jezebel. Reason, logic, and truth. Those are not allowed. I'm not kidding you. You can sit there and you can reason and say, well, the sky's blue. No, it's not. That's what you're going to get. Can you say that again? Okay, the three things that you cannot reason with somebody that has the spirit of Jezebel is reason, logic, and truth. The facts. You could even say the facts in there too. That's all meaningless because it's a spirit that will take you over and will completely control you. And then you're sitting there wondering, well, how did that happen? You know, you just broken heart. How did that happen? Well, it's the spirit of Jezebel. Now, this year that we just went into is Rosh Hashanah. And of course, when you see the Jewish year, you always see 2 years of the our calendar. So it's 2022 to 2023. In other words, Rosh Hashanah 2022 to Rosh Hashanah 2023. So this year is 5783 on the Jewish calendar. Okay? Now, we put that in the Paleo Hebrew, and let's see what we come out with. So you take each individual thing, like 5, the 7, the 8, and 3, and you figure out what it is. The 5 is the hey. It's that guy going like that. You know, Yod Hey Vav Hey, behold the hand, behold the nail, behold the nailed hand. Okay? Here it is. So it means to behold, to look at, to consider. 7 is Zion, which means plow. Okay? 8 is Het, which is, that's kind of a fence sideways, because it's a separation. And then the last one, Gamil, is pride. Okay? Pride. You might say, what? What is that? And I think it's obvious. Behold the plow. Consider the plow. Anybody can think of a verse in the New Testament that has plow? Anybody? Just say it. Yes.
What about James about plowing in the fields?
Yeah, he uses the farmer analogy and stuff. Yeah. So in the Gospels, I even wrote it down. Luke 9:62 says, once you put your hand to the plow, you don't look back, or you're not fit for the kingdom of God. Because what is it? There's a task ahead of you, a focus, and that gets your total attention. Okay? So behold the plow. So in other words, for this last year, we're going straight ahead. We're not going to look back. And it's just going full blast to do our ministry. Remember I told you, in fact, I think of this now because I shared this with Sioux Falls and everybody's like, but it's true. The 2 happiest years of my life, I'm most joyous, I should say, 1986 and this year. Does anybody remember why?
1986? Did you give your life to the Lord?
No, that was 1981.
Didn't they say like 86 reasons that God is
No, 88. Actually, that was one of the questions they brought up in the Q&A. No, it's because both years. No, that's good. I still have that booklet. Yeah, that's probably a collector's item. Those were the 2 years that I got to fulfill my ministry to the Lord. If you want to not just live life and just get through or have all kinds of by the way, if you fulfill your ministry, you will have all kinds of disasters around you. That's okay. But if you really want the fullness of joy that God has for you, you fulfill your ministry. I don't care if it's dumping garbage or handing out tracts, whatever it is, you need to fulfill it. Okay? So this says, behold or consider the plow, and there's going to be a separation from pride this year. How are we going to be? Now, what's the greatest sin in the Bible? We say that's a sin that God has a special hatred for. Now, why? Satan. Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28. And in fact, he says in Timothy, Paul told Timothy, do not lay hands hastily on, don't lay hands on anyone too hastily. It means ordaining them for ministry. Why? Because they might incur the condemnation of the devil. In other words, they might get prideful. Yeah. It is the sin that God hates. So this year, I really feel like this. He's going to take his people and he's going to get the pride out of them. Now, I'll tell you a funny story because he's not here about somebody in this somebody in this group. Well, they're real nice. They send me a text every day, from some app. It has the like the devotional of the day. I'm not kidding you. Did I tell you guys this one? For like 90 straight days, every single verse dealt with pride. Wow. Every single one. But I know he wasn't digging them up. Wow. Or maybe he was. But yeah, thanks. But I don't think he was. And I was like, okay, he sent one. Then by the time you hit the 20th, you're like, am I prideful? And I started looking at my own heart and I was really like, yeah, there is some pride. And God meant to just knock it out of me, and we need to search our hearts. So I think that, behold the plow, put your mind at the task ahead, fulfill your ministry. And this year, there's going to be a separation from pride because you guys keep up with the news. Is it possible there might be coming persecution this year? Yeah, pretty much. It'd be amazing if it doesn't come this year, I would think. It's already in other countries. It's just that we live in this little pocket. And like I said over and over again, I don't think he's going to deprive the United States of America the privilege and the honor of being persecuted for his name's sake. He loves us too much. Consider it a badge of honor. Remember that remnants I showed you at Luke 21 about woke? It says, nation will rise against nation. As ethnic group will woke. That's what the word means. Rise up. Will woke against ethnic group. And where's that woke causing tension? From ethnic group to ethnic group. I'm sure that's a remnant there. I've never heard anybody use that. Here's little old me, below average Joan. God chose me that. It's like amazing. So that's what I think is going to happen is we got to keep our eye on that task ahead, and we're going to have a separation from pride. Now, Rosh Hashanah 2023 is 5784. So it's the same thing. Our deeds, the plow is going to follow us into heaven because that's where the reward is, the Bema seat of Christ. Right now, how people have the attitude, well, I'm just happy to get into heaven. Well, you know what? The way you're living now will determine your position and your reward, and that's for eternity. So that's just pseudo spirituality when people say that. Well, I just want to get into heaven. Now watch this. This is a neat little thing. It's the same thing. Behold the plow, because it's going to follow us. And separation, not from pride, because once we're raptured, there's going to be no pride in heaven, especially after we see Jesus. It's going to be like, wow, what was I thinking that I ever did anything? It's going to be a separation by going through the door, dalet. That's what that Paleo Hebrew means. We're going to go through a door. We're going to separate by going through a door.
I thought it was
A gate. Well, you're thinking of Matthew 5, the narrow gate and all that, okay? That's to get into life. Yeah. Yeah, you have to agonize to get through it. But, we tend to poo-poo that. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to have a separation through a door. Now, what is that door? And I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. Revelation 1:19 says, John, when he saw the vision of the risen Christ, Jesus told him, write the things which thou hast seen, the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter. Gives him an outline, right? Things which have been, which is, he saw that vision of the risen Christ, the things which are, and guess what chapter 2 and 3 concern? The church, because he wrote 7 letters to 7 churches. Jesus did, not John. And as you go through those 7 letters, each one covers a church age, which is part of my message on Sunday. Okay, each one covers a church age. And then the next time metatalta is used, because he said the things after this is John 4:1. Let's see what it says. After this I looked. This is John. Yes, Revelation 4:1. Thank you. Behold, a door was opened in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was that of a trumpet talking with me, which said, come up hither, and I will show you the things which must take place, metatalta, hereafter. That's the rapture right there. Typologically it is, but if it's perfect, you have the church age, the churches in 2 and 3, 4:1, John sees a door up in heaven, right? And he hears a voice as in a trumpet. What do we hear at the rapture? Trumpet. 1 Thessalonians 4:16 and 17. 1 Corinthians 15, 51 and 52. Right? It even has a name, that last trumpet. Yes. The last trumpet, which is the last trumpet blown on Feast of Trumpets. So Paul was saying the rapture would take place on the Feast of Trumpets, which I'm convinced it will. Okay? So we just got a little, if a year seems long and far away, and I get it. It does, doesn't it? In light of eternity, when James talks about our whole life is but a vapor that's here, right? And it's gone. And some of you guys have been around close to as long as I've been. You'll say, where did the years go? Right? My gosh, where did they go? So another year is nothing. But like you said, Mike, it's another year to witness to people, another year to just experience Yeshua and see what he has for you. Here's our life. I just thought of this because I shared this in Sioux Falls. Here's my life. I mean, this is really my life. John 3:8. Jesus said, you hear the sound of the wind, okay? The wind blows and you hear the sound of it. You don't know where it came from and where it's going. He said, so is everyone that is born of the Spirit. And that's really been my life the last couple of years. I have no idea how it ended up in Sioux Falls. And then I'm back here on Tuesday just teaching this. But that's all of us. If you just yield, and it was because I made one commitment. Remember, a year and a half ago, I said, Lord, because of all the things I was going through, if opportunity for ministry comes up, I'm going to do it unless you stop me. And I'm not sure if I would say that now. But I've already made that commitment. And bam, things have just come up, which have been astounding. The feast are Moedim, right? And the feast are the Mikra. Yes, they're the Mikra, which is holy. He says, my feasts are holy convocations, holy Mikras, holy rehearsals. That's right. And then these are my Moedim, my appointed times, which means a sign or a signal. Even in that, he's telling you the feasts are prophetic and point to something else. And how do we know that for sure? Being in the New Testament. Is there hardcore evidence from the New Testament that they are prophetic? Yes. Where? Yes. Yes. You guys are great. 1 Corinthians, remember what I called it? Code. Remember, it's the first month has most of the feast, and then the 7th month are exactly, isn't that funny that they're a half a year apart? Because when you get into the feast template, you'll see how it's just amazing. And then there's something in the 3rd month. Okay, what's in the 1st month? In order, without looking.
Passover.
Yes. Ooh, Passover. Okay.
Larissa's not answering first because she's holding that baby.
I know. Yeah. Come on, second feast.
First fruit? No.
Unleavened bread.
Oh.
Bread, right.
Okay.
Then the first fruit.
Unleavened bread, and then the first fruits. Okay. Then what's in that 3rd month?
That would be the
Yes.
what do they call it?
Feast of Weeks. Yeah. A Shavuot. Yeah. Pentecost. Okay. Then you get into the the fall. This is in the spring. This is kind of towards, getting to be summer. And this is, you have 3 feasts at the end. What are they? Yes.
Rosh Hashanah and Day of Atonement.
Now hang on. Feast of Trumpets and Rosh Hashanah are really the same thing. Although they're not. Yeah, they celebrate it as Rosh Hashanah, head of the year, or the New Year's. Huh?
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Tabernacle.
Yes. Okay.
Good job, Jay.
Yeah. So this is the day of At-One-Ment, right? And then this is the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay. So as we go through 1 Corinthians, we see that there's an order that Paul put. He names off these feasts in order, and he tells how they're fulfilled. How is Passover fulfilled? 1 Corinthians 5:7.
Passover lamb.
Christ, our Passover, has been sacrificed. Good. And then he says, so clean out the leaven and celebrate the feast with unleavened bread. Well, what feast? Unleavened bread, right? Okay. And so Christ dies here. This was when Christ, in that year, it was 3 days before the next festival. It's a 7-day festival, but the way it works, somewhere first fruit comes out. It was 3 days. And how does that correlate to Christ after he died? 3 days.
Resurrection.
Yes, 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. Then first fruits. Yes, 1 Corinthians 15:20, it says, Christ is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. So he fulfills them. Then we get to Acts, and this is also in 1 Corinthians 15. I'm going to go to Acts chapter 2, and what happens there?
Pentecost. The Holy Spirit. The beginning of the church.
Yes.
Birth of the church.
Right there. In fact, it says when the day of Pentecost had fully come, or it could be when the day of Pentecost was being fulfilled, as in prophetically fulfilled. And that's exactly what happened. So Pentecost represents this. So with the first 4 feasts, they all happened in order and on the day. Okay, I say this millions of times, and you're going to find somebody on the radio that will go 99% of the way, but he won't go all the way. So if you see a pattern here, what do you expect for these last 3 feasts?
Same pattern you expect would be fulfilled.
In order, on the day.
Mm-hmm.
And then they...
What was that last piece?
Oh, that's a booth. Tabernacles, booths, tents, whatever. So, we're looking for trumpets. And then, coincidentally, the very next feast that Paul brings up in 1 Corinthians, after all these first 4, is what? Trumpets. 1 Corinthians 15:51 and 52, behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye. For at the last trump, which actually in the Greek is literally trumpet, at the last trumpet, the dead in Christ shall rise and all this other stuff, okay? So he says at the last trumpet. Again, as he goes through these feasts, he doesn't explain what Passover is, doesn't explain what unleavened bread. He just tells you how it's fulfilled. Why? Because in Acts 18, how long was Paul in Corinth? A year and a half. 18 months. Year and a half. How long was he in Thessalonica in Acts? 3 Sabbaths reason. And then he writes back in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and all he talks about is, don't you remember I told you the Antichrist going into the temple and displaying himself as God? Don't you remember about the deluding influence? Don't you remember about the rapture? Don't you remember? Oh, of course. So he obviously went over this. So at that last trumpet, which is 99 trumpets blown, and then that last trumpet, one long blast, the Jews then and now call the last trumpet. You have the rapture on the 1st of the 7th month. 10 days later, you have the Day of Atonement, which is the tribulation period. That's why when you do that and you go through the tribulation period, all the major events happen to fall on feast days because you have a starting day. The next section that we're going to go into is key. The next section is key. It tells us the timetable. It is known as the year of Yovel. We call it what? The year of? Yes. It sounds like it's the year of jubilance, of celebrating, right? It's actually Yovel, which is what? Get this. Come on. What is? Come on, guys. I have told you this, and I'm not baiting you by doing this. I'm just saying, it's the year of the ram's horn. But what's the shofar? I thought shofar was ram's horn. No, it's not. It's the trumpet made from the ram's horn. And why it's so significant to the Jews is, remember the Akedah, where Abraham had to sacrifice his son? And what saved him was a ram's horn. It got stuck in the thicket. And the same way that the son of Abraham was saved by ram's horn, we, the sons of Abraham, are going to be saved by ram's horn when it blows that blast, that last 100 blasts, because we're going to be out of here. Totally out of here. Okay, now, this would be a good time for questions because we're going to start really going in depth into the year of Jubilee. And then we're going to see some interesting stuff start to line up with the year, you know, and they say that the year of Jubilee is lost. And that's why I could say, I think it's here and it doesn't come. Well, I don't know the cycles. That's all I have to say. Okay, which is actually true. The Shemitah cycles, the year of Jubilee, I don't know. I can't say for sure. And so we just kind of guess and stuff. But yeah, the year of Jubilee, like I said, if God appeared and he said you could have the answer to one question prophetically, I would say, which Rosh Hashanah, our Feast of Trumpets, introduces the year of Jubilee? He tells me, bam, I got it. Because that's the 7th Shemitah in a cycle of 7. And at the end of those 7 sevens, 49 years, what's the 50th year? The Jubilee, which Mike had said way back in summer of last year. He goes, Shemitah cycle, 7 years. Isn't that what the tribulation period is? Yeah, exactly. 7 years. Okay. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's the prophetic day in a scripture or prophetic month? How many days? How many days are like 30? Yes, in a year. So you divide that by 12, comes out to 30. So in the Bible times, they were on a 30-day calendar, lunar calendar, because it fit, it worked. You didn't have to guess when Feast of Trumpets was. After something happened around, was it 702, 703 BC? Maybe it was Hezekiah and the shadow moving backwards on the staircase. Something, then we went from 360 days to 365 and a quarter days. And that's when they started saying, oh man, okay, we're going to guess that the new moon's going to be on this day. And if it didn't happen and they prepared, then they said, okay, it's the next day. That's why it became a 2-day feast, right? Is because they couldn't predict absolutely. And it's the only feast, get this, that begins the month, which is on a new moon. Because once you establish the first day, well, then you know the 14th day of Passover, 15th with unleavened bread, all that stuff. Okay? You know all that stuff. But that's why it's known as the feast that what?
No man knows the day of the hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one knows the day of the hour.
Yeah, of that feast.
Because it's based on the moon.
But we know Matthew 24, Mark 13, he says, no man knows the day of the hour. He wasn't talking about the rapture. We already took that in context. That's talking about the second coming. And we talked about reasons why it could be the second coming. Why would no man know the day or the hour of the second coming? Well, for one thing, after the rapture, all believers are gone. And when the sun darkens and the stars fall from the sky, it's kind of hard to keep track then too. And you're trying to live, it's kind of hard to keep track too. And when all the believers are gone, and it's only special Christians are even tracking this stuff that know this stuff. Imagine when all believers are gone. Oh my gosh. Of course they're not going to know it then. Remember the abomination of desolation. When does that occur? In the tribulation period? And how do we know that?
3.5 years.
Yes?
In the midst of the week.
Yeah, oh God.
9:27.
Oh man. Okay. Teacher's pet, she gets it every time. Okay, Noga, we love it. Daniel 9:27, in the midst of... Yeah, well, I know. But right. All right, yeah, that's just JJ joking. All right, yeah, because he shall make a firm covenant with many. If you go to 9:26, who is the prince of the people to come, which was Rome. He's going to be some kind of leader of the Roman Empire. That he will make a firm covenant with the many, or really confirm a covenant with the many. And in the middle of the week, at 3.5 years, exactly in the middle, he shall bring an end to sacrifices and grain offerings. That's when he breaks it. He says now, and I was reminded when I was looking at that, abomination of desolations, hashikutz hamen, hashikutz hashamen. So shikutz, which is abomination. If you just do, you know how you could touch a word on your phone Bible? It gives you the Hebrew. And then instead of doing a search for that word in English, you could do a search for that word in Hebrew. I don't know if yours does that. Mine does that. You could search for that shikutz. And do you know what shikutz is mostly translated as? Detestable idol. Get it? Detestable. It's the idol that brings a desolation.
Where he sets up himself, an idol of himself to be worshipped in the temple.
Tikis Epiphanes. What does he do? He puts a statue of Zeus in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, okay, on his birthday. And that's why I'm saying if someone was born on the 10th of Nisan, I'd be really suspicious because we know that's the 10th of Nisan by adding up the dates and all that. See, remember that half year thing I said, between the first month and the seventh month, that's half a year. So if it starts on Day of Atonement, okay, if it starts on the Day of Atonement, it's going to end on the Day of Atonement. It's going to be exactly, 20 days. Now, if you go right to the midst, you just have to jump ahead half a year. Okay? And so if you're in the seventh month, what do you end up in? The first month. And if it starts on the 10th of the seventh month, what do you end up on the 10th of the first month? The same day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem and presented himself as the Mashiach is the same day that I think the Antichrist is going to go in there to dedicate the temple, reveal that statue, say he's God, according to 2 Thessalonians 2, and bam, the Jews have to flee to Petra. Daniel 12, or actually Revelation 12, the woman flees into the wilderness for 1,260 days. I mean, we'll go through all that. So does that make sense? I mean, I went over it very lightly. Then we'll go over it in more detail. But you can map out all this stuff if you use the feast template, but nobody wants to use it. Shikutz is a statue. And is there a statue made in the book of Revelation during the tribulation period? Now, I can see you're thinking. Or so you're like, where's a statue or an image made? Yes. Revelation 13, the false prophet. After the beast rises out of the sea, then the false prophet rises out of the land. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke as a dragon. Okay? He's kind of the false religious leader. What does he do? He doesn't make the image, but he causes the people to make this image, okay, that can speak and all this other stuff. Is that what he takes into the, maybe? I don't know. So there's a lot more to do with the abomination of desolation, and we'll go into all that. And in fact, as they're building it, technically, it doesn't have to be there until exactly mid-trib. And I'm thinking everything's finished at mid-trib, and that's the dedication. Now, if you have the Ark of the Covenant, what's that lid called? Mercy seat. Remember what I said I thought it was? Matthew 25. When Jesus comes back, he sits on his glorious throne. And if you have, it says the cherubim are in that lid. We kind of draw it like this, or the forward and touching wings. They can touch wings going like that. And you know what it becomes? A chair, a seat. See, that's, I believe, Jesus' glorious throne. And that's where I believe the Antichrist comes and sits. He's going to go into the very temple of God, displaying himself as being God. He's going to go right into the Holy of Holies. Now, how could he go into the Holy of Holies? Well, let me ask you this. How could Antiochus Epiphanes go into the Holy of Holies and not be struck dead? I'm going to stump the assembly.
I know the answer to that. It's somewhere in here.
Somewhere.
Ezekiel
Oh.
the Holy Spirit had already left.
Yes. Ezekiel had a vision of the Spirit leaving the temple, hovering above the city, and then leaving. So by the time Antiochus went in there, the Spirit had left. And so in this new temple, since it's not sanctioned of God, Jesus is not going to be, And maybe that's why in Daniel 12, from the abomination, the desolation is 1,335 days. You go 75 days past the end of the tribulation. Where do you end up? Hanukkah, the rededication of the temple. I mean, it just goes on and on.
What's Yom Kippur?
Yom Kippur?
Yeah.
Oh, that is Day of Atonement. No. Okay, time out. Time out. That is Day of Atonement.
Is that what the Jews are celebrating now?
Yes. That's the Jewish name for what we call Day of Atonement. It's actually the Day of the Kafar, or the Day of the Covering.
Oh.
Remember, Noah pitched his ark. He kafared it on the inside and outside with pitch and all that. So it was a type of salvation for the Jews through the tribulation. All right. Now, next question. Come on.
The Day of Atonement starts 10 days after the Feast of Trumpets.
Well, technically, the day of Rosh Hashanah, or Feast of Trumpets, is the first of the 7th month. Okay?
Yeah.
The 10th of that same month starts Atonement. Right. So if you take out the first 2 days, 1st and the 10th, there's 8 days in between. Then it's a 2-day feast. So there's supposed to be 7 days in between. They call it the 7 days of awe and stuff, even though people get mixed up, called 10 days of awe.
That's the 7 days of awe?
Yeah.
Between the Feast of Trumpets.
Yes. So, since they made it 2 days and you don't count that, so it's really 7, although you often hear it called the 10 days of awe. It could be a semi-real physical event. Who's to say it doesn't create such disruption that something happens to the rotation of the earth and they go to a 360-day year after that? Get it?
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. So something...
Weren't you the one that shared with us that Revelation is like the Old Testament is God dealing with Israel all over again?
Yeah. In other words, you can go from the cross to the rapture.
Mm-hmm.
That's a parenthetical insert called the church age, and let's remove it. You could literally go from the cross right into the rapture and setting up of all this stuff in the temple. And why do you have sacrifices and offerings in the temple and all that? Because the church is gone. And it almost reverts back to an Old Testament type of age. Exactly. The age of grace is gone. Now, you still have to be saved through the Spirit. I think that's true in the Old Testament, New Testament, whenever. Okay? And it's got to be through Jesus somehow. In the Old Testament, it was through the sacrifices which pictured Jesus and your faith in those. And so after he died, his death was so effective, it worked for saving people before he died and after he died. So that's the whole thing in itself.
Is the number one deception that Satan will use in forgot my question. I wrote it down.
Oh, okay. So, it's actually the top 5. That was one I was asking Sioux Falls. Yeah, could you name in order the top 5 deceptions? I'm like, what? I can name number 1. according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, starting at verse 3, the Antichrist goes into the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Then you go through about how people rejected the love of the truth. And then it says, that's why they're given over to believe the lie. And I think it's just the word pseudo, the false. Not because God's being mean, because once you reject the truth, you're saying, God, stay away from me. I'll believe this. You will go. God doesn't have to do anything at that point. You're going to come. Yeah, he doesn't even have to, but he'll come in, obviously, and strengthen that. Just like if you make a decision for God, he'll come in and strengthen that, But yeah, then at that point, you're on a certain course. So, yeah, that's scary. And then the thing about where's American prophecy, Ezekiel 39:6.
What does it say?
It says that when Gog brings Magog on the mountains of Israel, remember the Ezekiel invasion, he's going to send fire and brimstone upon Magog. And at the same time, he's going to send fire and brimstone upon the coastlands. In other words, some kind of big body of land that has coastlands. And some people think that's America. Okay, maybe not. But it could just simply be the way we're going. We're not going to matter. And we don't know exactly. There's all kinds of theories on the Ezekiel war in 38 and 39. It could be, it happened. We can see it this year. Could happen over the period of next year, because it would kind of set up things. You get Russia out of the way, and a lot of the Arab allies out of the way, and then that kind of opens it up. Because Putin has been against a lot of that, kind of stuff going on. But if you remove him, and his allies, all of a sudden it's just, and then the church gets raptured, then it's instant, one world government. In Frankfurt, Germans are the minority and all this.
The people in London are minorities.
See, that was the Babylonian strategy.
Yeah.
And that Nebuchadnezzar would remove people from the homeland so they don't have that patriotic ties.
Yeah,
And once you remove people out and put other people in, then it totally changes the equation, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
It's just happening and we're not even aware of it. I was blown away when I was
Oh, let me tell you something. I was reading about the 10 regions decades ago. Decades. And so this stuff has all been on, it's just now they're implementing it. They plan, see, like us, I'm trying to plan like 10 minutes ahead. They plan decades and decades ahead, and they have option A, B, C, and D. So they go by a very precise plan, and they'll take as long as they need.
Yeah.
And now the doors are wide open.